Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science Podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com, and this week I am happy to introduce a very special guest on our show as always. I'm joined by Jeff Glazier, who is CEO and a founding member of General Oncology, a company that is focused on advancing innovative therapies that address some of the greatest unmet needs in oncology today. Jeff brings not only executive leadership, but also a vision for how cutting-edge science can be translated into meaningful treatments for patients worldwide. Jeff has been CEO of General Oncology since August 2024 and was previously Chief Operating Officer since 2019. Jeff has overseen all business operations at the company, from corporate strategy and clinical trial site selection to preclinical lab selection, legal matters, IT infrastructure, and patient protection. Previously, he co-founded the healthcare technology company ProviderTech and worked as a private equity attorney at Ropes Gray LLP. Jeff has a JD from Harvard Law School, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience from Brown University. In our discussion today, we'll be diving into Jeff's journey as a founder, as a CEO, the company's unique approach to oncology drug development, and as well the broader challenges and opportunities shaping the future of cancer therapeutics. To learn about this and more, let's turn to Jeff now. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Hi, Ayesha. Thank you so much. It's so nice to meet you.
Likewise. And I'm so interested to learn more about your background and your journey from your background in law and now to directing as CEO, a company focused on oncology therapeutics. And so I'd like to learn more about how that journey transpired and what ultimately led you to heading General Oncology today.
You know, it's funny since you asked that, because I feel in life, oftentimes we go one route and then it turns out that it leads us somewhere that we don't expect, right?
Mm-hmm.
I never wanted to do law. Actually,
Oh, really?
I wanted to go to med school. I am huge into science. Science and medicine are so important to me. I grew up in a family of almost all physicians. I kind of missed my chance to take the MCATs, so I went to law school
The
instead.
next best thing, I guess, or not.
I can't. So long story there. I'll skip it for today. But I ended up in law school and worked at Ropes, as you said, and it's an amazing place. I was there for a short time, about a year and a half or so, and learned a ton about deal work and negotiation. And then got out of law because it wasn't what I wanted to do. And um, as you said, I was doing startups, but I always wanted to get involved in my uncle's research. Arnie is my uncle. He's the chief scientific officer, and he actually had been doing cancer research going back to 1990 through predecessor entities to General Oncology. I had been following his work since I was literally a kid. And I got the opportunity to do that when it was about the end of 2014. And that's actually an interesting story. I'll go down that road if you don't mind. Yeah, so he was working on a new class of drugs that were designed to either cure or control cancer without significant toxicity to patients. And while he was working on that, it was 2012 at the time, his sister, my Aunt Sharon, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She had inherited BRCA mutation, as does a lot of my family. And she had a bit of radiation as part of a clinical trial at Mass General. And then she had surgical resection, a Whipple surgery to remove the tumor. It was stage 2. These days it would be stage 3. They changed HACC guidelines, but it hadn't spread beyond that area, at least visibly at that time. So they resected it, and they had found that the cancer ended up having spread to a particular lymph node called the common hepatic artery lymph node. And when you look at published literature, when you have stage one, two, or three pancreatic cancer that spreads to that particular node, even if it's all completely surgically resected, surgical margins free of tumor, unfortunately, the mortality rate is 100%. And so there was really no hope from standard of care for her. And she turned to Arnie, her brother, because she knew everything he'd been involved with. And she said, "Can you come up with anything for me?" And so he dropped all of his work and he knew he had to use old drugs in a new way, right? Because there was no time to get a new drug approved for her. And what he realized when he looked into it was that because of her BRCA mutation, intermediate dose melphalan, an old drug, would likely be curative for her. It was actually very hard to find a place willing to treat her that way. He shopped it around the world, but Tufts Medical Center here in Boston understood what he wanted to do. They thought it made sense. They actually thought it would cure her, and they treated her that way. And she's 13 years cancer
Wow.
free this year. Yeah, it's
Congratulations. Yeah.
first. So at about the 2 year mark, which would put us at the end of 2014, that's when it was clear that it had worked. And Tufts was excited, and they made interest. Other hospitals, Mass General was excited too. And it became clear that the right path for Arnie's business was to, at least in the short term, move away from designing these more complex, this new class of drugs he wanted to make, and see if there's a way to bring Sharon's treatment or a refinement of it to the clinic. He had, by that time, in those 2 years, reworked it by adding some other um, previously approved drugs, but they worked together in a new way to make the combination even more effective, at least in theory. That was the idea. And at that time, he turned to an old family friend who was the CEO of one of his older entities, you could say, back in the 1990s. And that person was going to bring in money. And I realized that they kind of didn't have someone that knew how to pull the business part of it together. And I had zero experience with it, but I think just with my background, I I knew I probably could. So that's how I got involved. I reached out and actually volunteered my time for years, but I reached out to the CEO and said, "Do you guys want help?" And he said, "No." And then I said, "I'll do it for free. Literally, I'll work for free." And he said, "No." And then a week after that, he called me. He said, "Yeah, I'll take you up on that." So that's how the transition happened from law to what I'm doing today. And it's the best thing ever. And I have to say, if I hadn't done that bit of law, I wouldn't be able to have done my job now. So things work.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that story, and a very personal one at that as well, with your aunt. And yeah, like you said, it's amazing sometimes how like we don't the path that we kind of set off on isn't always the one that we continue on. And you have different branches, and that's so wonderful to hear how you were able to use your background and contribute, and eventually where you are. So that's yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And in terms of really your experiences in your career, so having that legal background, pulling things together to drive a company forward. So what are the things that have shaped your vision for how cancer drug development should be approached potentially differently than other companies? What is it that you bring to General Oncology, and what differentiates it from others in the field?
Well, I'm not the scientist, so I should just lead with right. I mean, that's more of a question for Arnie in terms of why he went down the road he did. I can say that his approach to it is completely different than what others are doing, and we're hearing that from everyone. I mean, as we're in talks with VCs and other pharmaceuticals, we have asked if they've been approached with anything like what we're doing. The answer is always no. But I think he just took a different look at how to approach cancer treatments. Y- everyone, I think there are a lot of great ideas out there. It's been very, very hard to find ones that work. I hope ours do. But he definitely took a fresh look at the problem um, a while back. And without kind of delving deep into science, it's hard to answer that. But we are certainly in a different type of treatment paradigm than what others are doing.
And what really would you say are the core missions and goals of General Oncology?
I mean, ideally, I'd like to find better treatments that either cure or control the disease. I mean, I hesitate to be too bold on it because again, it's until you actually run a trial, right, and have your results. I don't wanna kind of get ahead of myself, and we have run a trial and do have some results, but yeah, I mean, I feel like I want to make patients' lives better. That's really important to me.
Yeah, ultimately, it begins and ends with the patient, I think. And in terms of the approach that your uncle, then now that you are helping to spearhead, really, it seems like it's not only about driving innovations through sometimes tried and tested formulas, is also an innovation in itself, repurposing drugs and perhaps trying different combinations. So like you said, I think it's not always about the next cutting edge drug, but really making do with what we have and making it better in some sense. And so would you say that's the approach, one of the approaches at General Oncology? And in terms of repurposing, are you looking at combination strategies as well, or are you looking at drugs as monotherapies, and what classes of drugs, and without getting too much into the science, but
I think that's really interesting the way you just framed that. And it resonates with me. In terms of the clinical drug candidate we have, it's called GO4, and it's a combination of melphalan, carmustine, which is also known as BCNU, hydroxycobalamin, which is vitamin B12B, and vitamin C. Those four drugs. I mean, that's certainly a repurposed combination. Um, so yeah, I think that that's accurate to restate that we focused on what can we make use of that's out there that's maybe been overlooked. And well, if you give not just any one or two of those drugs, but any subset of those four, any three of those four, at least in theory, you wouldn't get the results that we are looking to get. You really need all four. And so there's an overlooked aspect we feel to what these drugs can do together. And that's what was special there. In terms of the rest of our pipeline, I hesitate to use the word repurposed on it, although we are taking old drugs and building new forms of them. So they're entirely new molecules, but they're built on old drugs that we feel can be refined and modified. But that's not really repurposed per
like
se.
next
When you're
gen almost, just to make them better
it's as
than
opposed to screening thousands of potential molecules and seeing what might be new, Arnie's approach has been to come up with a to start with the goal, right? How do you go about either curing or controlling the disease? And then defining the specific requirements that need to be met. And he writes those out, right? These are the things that need to be done. And then he says, okay, how can we go about achieving that? What do we know? What's in literature? How can we piece that together? How can we take what other science knowledge we have and add to it and come up with a way to meet those requirements? And there are ways to do that by in theory again, using old drugs and old science, but building something new with it. And that's what our focus has been on. So it's exciting. I mean, I do love it. The
No, I mean, oncology is such a fast moving field, very complex. And I think in the past, definitely in the last decade or so, there have been so many different advances and different technologies with cell and gene therapies, CAR T cell therapies, but really, I think no one is going to be the magic bullet. And I think really having these different approaches, I think it's so refreshing to hear because I feel like any one field can't be just dominated by, let's say, one class of drug.
Well,
And
I to add to that, one thing Arnie always says, he doesn't believe that any one drug's going to work. He thinks it's going to take a combination of drugs to overcome at least widespread metastatic disease. Just because drug resistance can arise to any one drug, and it can arise to any two drugs and three drugs, but if you combine enough together, at least if they have completely independent mechanisms of action, then the chance that a cancer cell evolves resistance to all of those drugs goes way down. So I certainly don't want to claim that whatever we design would be the only solution. It might be part of the solution and the contribute, right? So that by adding another drug that can maybe overcome where others have a shortcoming, that
indeed. And so, what indications specifically in oncology is within your pipeline in terms of like the drugs that you're testing in various cancers?
it's really at this stage, the stuff we're designing is at least for most of the drugs. We have one that we're designing that's specific to prostate, but other than that, a lot of them could potentially work on many types. And we're just a bit early to know what. The GO4 combination was designed to work on solid tumors and uh, possibly only the BRCA related subset and some other genes, but there's a chance it could work on solid tumors beyond just BRCA. That's something we're actually about to explore. But at least for the rest of the pipeline, I mean, many types are an option, and including blood cancers too.
And in terms of trial data, is there anything that you can share with us in terms of some of the combinations, some of the drugs that are in your pipeline that you're most excited about based on readouts so far?
I wish I could, but we actually are sharing our data in poster presentation at ESMO
Okay, nice,
afterward.
nice. So we'll keep our eye out on that for that. So for sure, that is wonderful. And in terms of really, as I mentioned, just the space of oncology, and as you mentioned with your story, with your personal story, with your aunt, and you've been in the field for well over a decade now, I can say. How have you seen things evolve, and what kinds of innovations, trends, attitudes, even in oncology, are you seeing that have shifted or changed? And so, how have things evolved within the past decade, and where do you see things going?
That's unfortunately not really within my space. That's again an Arnie question. I'm not as into all the science outside of what we do.
I
You know,
don't think it even has to be science per se. That's one aspect of it, but I guess just in terms of, we can even talk about the regulatory aspects, or what does it take to develop a drug today versus a decade ago? Has it been easier? Has the pandemic taught us some things about accelerated approvals and things of that nature?
we've been doing our clinical trials for that whole time almost. So, things took a while. I think the pandemic certainly changed things. In terms of accelerated approvals, I mean, we hope to be able to do one, but I the 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 answer has to be I haven't lived through that enough yet to be able to change. But yeah, our trial was slow. I mean, that's the truth of it. It went live in the beginning of 2021, but we started working on it in probably 2018. And it's had very slow enrollment for the first few years. I don't know if that was COVID related. I know that it's easy to blame something on COVID, but I don't think that's what it was. Um, I actually don't. I think it's that when you bring something new that's completely new, people can be hesitant to try it. And that's what the principal investigator had said to me when I spoke to him. they were initially expecting to enroll several patients a month, and we were enrolling maybe one a year almost. And it, it was really slow. And I asked him why. He said it's hard to get people to try something that just there's no data on it at all. And what I found is that in the last year, we enrolled 5 of the 12 patients, I believe, were in 1 year. So it really accelerated as data came in. But yeah, that's kind of our experience.
That's interesting. Yeah, for sure. I think the patient recruitment and retention side of things in trials, I think that's an ongoing. It's also ever evolving. And so, what kind can you perhaps speak to some strategies that have worked versus not in your opinion? Yeah.
The best thing for recruitment I learned is get more sites. That's down. I I had tried everything that I could. I mean, we went down every road to try to speed up recruitment. Nothing works in my experience other than just more sites. And that's what we were told at the beginning. We actually have been working with consultants and CROs at the brought everything in house since then, but at the time, and the general feedback I got was that the only way to speed up recruitment is sites. Uh, I kind of didn't want to believe it at the time because I was hoping that would be something, some magic bullet, right? That you can throw cash at a problem, and whether it's PR or whatnot. But no, it's like that's it.
That's it. Yeah. It's a numbers game, I guess, right? And when you expand your number of sites, I guess that's what it takes. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Interesting. What other aspects can you speak to in terms of just developing drugs in this very complex field? Let me ask you in terms of partnerships. We see a lot more collaborations happening between within industries, between small biotech, biopharma, big biopharma, pharma companies, or just smaller, mid-sized companies collaborating. And then you have different stakeholders, patient advocacy groups, working with regulatory bodies. So who are all of those stakeholders that are important in the equation and in the ecosystem of drug development, and especially in oncology today?
I think they're all important. And for us, we're actually at a stage right now where we're looking for those kinds of partnerships. For a long time, we deliberately did not. We were able to run all this stuff ourselves, and I'm glad we did. It just, yeah, I think it's important to surround yourself by people who can help instead of trying to do everything on your own. Both in terms of how to run a business itself, right? In terms of employees and such, and on a macro scale in terms of other players that work with a business. So yeah, I think it's important to have relationships with the nonprofits and the advocacy groups, and we do. And yeah, that's just everyone helps, and everyone's looking to get to the same place, right? That's a nice thing. It's everyone trying for the same goal. Yeah,
That's awesome. And then also, I think really having that diversity in terms of diverse backgrounds, professional, academic backgrounds, I think that really lends to different diverse ideas and just different being multifaceted. And so how do you feel your legal background, I think you mentioned in the beginning, that definitely helped you get to where you are in terms of the contributions you've made. So what specifics can you comment on in terms of your legal background and the contributions you were able to make?
well, I mean, it let me pull the business together in terms of I had to handle all of that legal work, but I think it also, and I did for years. I mean, until we hired a head of legal, what, 2 weeks ago. Until then, everything was on me. I outsourced, too, but I think it was less the legal aspect itself. I learned to negotiate at the firm, which was key. Although I ended up developing my own style, which didn't follow anything from that, but still, you learn. Um, but I also think it was my science background that helped too. I don't want to this law. I I loved science. I did science for undergrad. I used to read it for fun, and I can pick up and read journal articles, which is really important. And I do, right? Um, I have that. I guess I'm lucky in that I have both worlds, the business skills, but I also have the science skills. And I actually do get involved deep in the science. So it's not like, I mean, I'm very very involved in the clinical trial design. I'm involved on any medical decision, even though I'm not the one that actually makes the final call. I mean, I'm in on those discussions, and yeah, I think it's both that both led this.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great place to be where having that science background, obviously very important, but then pairing it with your legal background and the decision making and negotiations, as you mentioned, I think that's really cool that you're able to tie all of that together, because I think that's essentially what it takes to get a drug to market. It's not just the science, right? So in terms of navigating the landscape, and I know that you don't have a product in market per se, but of course you've studied those pathways. And so, what does it take to get a drug to market in today's landscape, where things are supposedly and obviously very competitive, and all of the different factors at play? How are you preparing to bring drugs to market?
I mean, the simple answer, which might sound trite, but I mean, you have to beat what's out there, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. Is unless you're developing a better mousetrap, it's not going to get approved, right? So, um, and I think if, especially in a field like oncology, if you are developing a better mousetrap and if it's safe and effective, it should be approved. So that's at the highest level from a science standpoint, right? But then there's business aspects to it also, where the drug has to have commercial viability, it has to have a. I mean, there's a bunch of aspects to it to bring a drug to market, and I think I'm not sure if that really answered what you were looking for, but I think that's the truth of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in terms of what does success look like for you personally and for general oncology in the coming years? What milestones can we expect from the company, and what can we keep an eye out for? I know that you mentioned the poster presentation coming up at ESMO. What other milestones can you share with us that will be coming up?
Yeah, I think in terms of upcoming milestones, we're doing a phase one and trial expansion right now. At least we're about to launch that. So I would say hopefully over the next year we'll be doing that. And then the trial should be headed to phase two regardless, because we actually were headed to phase two, but we decided to expand the phase one first. So we have those are our plans for GO4. Have a bunch of preclinical drugs, probably about I don't know, five or six right now, that hopefully we're going to have data on soon, and hopefully something at some point that we can share. So that'll be milestones there. Um, we actually have some interesting drugs that were designed for oncology that we realized have mass market ophthalmology uses. And I'm pretty excited about those published data at some point with respect to those drugs. In terms of what success would look like for me, I mean, I want to build this into a company of employees that love their job, that like to come to work, that all have the same goal, right? Is to develop new drugs to help fulfill unmet needs. And I think that's achievable. It feels that way right now. I mean, I don't think anything's easy, right? But that's kind of where I would be heading, and I think that would be success if I can turn this thing into a long-term operating business that's actually developing drugs that either are getting approved or being licensed to other companies that can bring them to market, and we're contributing. That's all I could ever ask for. That's oh,
And what one piece of advice would you give to the next generation of biotech leaders wanting to enter the space?
Sure. That's actually easy. I always give the same advice because it's so true, though, right? It's so true, and it's they say that most startups fail, and when I started off, I would have assumed it was because most ideas aren't good and just most ideas don't work, and I don't think that's true anymore. I mean, there are some ideas that aren't good, right? But a lot are, and I think that what actually makes it so most don't succeed is that almost every day it feels like something goes wrong. You know, that's just life. It's I think there are more ways for things to go wrong than there are for things to go right. So but it's like constant setbacks, constant surprises, and not always on a small scale. A lot of them are, if we don't solve this, this is a big, big problem. I feel like it's the ability to overcome that and to realize that unless you're very, very lucky, things aren't going to go easy. And just be prepared that you have massive, massive challenges, the make or break type challenges. And it probably won't, I mean, think 10 years of this for me. It's going to be like this for the length of however long General Oncology is around, right? And I feel like the biggest lesson there is just you can't give up. You have to be really creative. And you have to, every time something horrible thrown your way, realize that it's not a bad thing, right? It's a way to reframe or recast or and it's each time it occurs, we don't end up right back where we were. We actually end up ahead of where we were, right? So we'll be thrown a challenge, put our heads together, we'll solve it, and we'll be in a better place every time than before the challenge occurred. And I think that's the best advice I can give. It's just be ready for that because I think that's what separates the few that maybe get 10 or 20 or however long, they're around versus the ones that don't are the ones who can overcome that. And I just hope we can keep overcoming it.
Indeed, that is very sound advice, I would say, and I love that mindset. It's definitely, as we say, a growth mindset, accepting challenges and learning from everything that we do. So thank you so much for that perspective, and thank you so much for all of your insights and sharing all of the wonderful things that you're helping lead at General Oncology. And as I mentioned, we will be keeping an eye out for all of those upcoming milestones and hope to connect with you soon as well on those.
So nice with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for being on the show. Really appreciate your time. All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.